What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. It is time, the final video in our champs preview series, and this is our 4th seed versus 5th seed matchup, the New York Subliners versus the Seattle Surge. This one should be interesting. These teams have played a couple of times this year, and with a couple of weeks of practice, can the Seattle Surge get over the hump and upset New York Subliners on land? Let's dive in. We're going to start with New York, talk about the journey so far, talk about the great win in Major 4, kind of how they're going form-wise in this event, and then we'll do the same for Seattle, so let's dive in. As you see here for New York, it's been kind of a wild ride so far this year. They have been super up and down pretty much all season, both online and on land. Like, they've gotten upset quite a few times online. They've had some really tough land splits. They've lost to top 4 teams consistently at Major 1, where they kind of bombed out early. Major 2, where they came up short on Sunday at that event. Major 3, where once again in Toronto they came up short against another top 4 team, and then they finally converted one in Major 4 when they actually made the losers bracket run at the event. So I didn't really expect New York to win Major 4. I think Toronto's kind of weak performance and optic bombing out create an opportunity for New York to get deep in the tournament, get some confidence, and they end up getting a matchup against FaZe on Sunday, and they just kind of convert it. But if you look at like New York stats this year, the 20-9 seems pretty good for online qualifiers, but it's not as clinical as Toronto and FaZe and optic online through most of the year. And you see a lot of it has really just been tight kind of performances in Respawn. They've been good but not amazing, and it sometimes gets them in trouble even though their search has been good. And you see that the big problem is when they get to land, the S&D has been a little bit iffy. Although the control has been great, they've been understanding, be able to manage the flow of control on land, and the hard point's been solid. It's in the S&D that kind of falls off a little. And again, that's really been losses against sort of top 4 teams. They haven't really necessarily been majorly upset at a major this year, other than their loss to Rocker and Carolina at Major 1. Like, you see Major 2 here, they lost to FaZe and optic. Like, okay, people that made the finals at that tournament, like, that's tough. And then once again at Major 3, stop me if you heard this before, they lost to FaZe and optic again. And then in Major 4, they lost to FaZe early on in the tournament, but made the full losers bracket run and then beat FaZe in the finals. So it's been a wild ride for New York, and they have actually played Seattle in particular a couple of times here. If you see, they are 3-1 against them. Have been successful in 4 of the S&Ds in the 4 matchups. Hard point been split, but the control has been a big difference in this. Now, of note here, if we scroll through, and I'll highlight it for you, they did play once on land of the 4 matchups. It was a 3-1 at Major 3 that went in favor of New York. But other than that, all the other matches have been online, including a 3-1 New York victory during the Major 4 qualifiers. And then the only time Seattle beat them was a 3-1 win online. But as you see here, New York is really struggling during that split. This 3-game loss streak, we're like really critical on them and their gameplay after Major 2. But they then turned it around and actually like gave it a decent go at Major 3. And I think the best way to describe this New York Subliners team this year is that if we kind of put them amongst the top 4 teams, they have been the most iffy when it comes to Respawn, but their surge for the most part has been very good this season. And I think it's kind of kept them sort of on the right level when the Respawn has taken a dip in form throughout the year. And I think really the issue with their hard point, because of how aggressive Kismet and Hydra are, I think when things get too chaotic on the map, if they're pushing stuff out, and then Dante, Sib, and Skies are not picking stuff up correctly, or spawns getting flipped, not getting picked up, they end up kind of blowing a lot of holes. You see that they're 11th ranked whole team on 6-star, 10th on Karachi's all season stats, by the way, 9th on Rio. They are 2nd on Subbase, which is interesting because they've been up and down on that map. I don't know how they're only 4 and 6 on it. It's kind of crazy. And you see that points per hold, they're near the bottom, so they haven't really been like super efficient at holding, and they get broke. But you see at breaking hard points, this is actually the one stat where it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit map by map. They're great at breaking on Subbase. Vista and Karachi not too bad, but Rio and 6-star they really struggle. So I just think their hard point in the way that they play has been hot and cold. But that being said, they've been on a hot streak in a hard point. Day 2 pretty much, the last major, a little bit before that, and then subsequently like at the event. So I really think for New York, while these season stats are, kind of what they are, if you look at the last 30 days, the stats are actually really good. So if they continue this form that they've been on down the stretch here, right, and they don't regress, this is going to be a strength of this team because they've been pretty much automatic in this game mode. And it's going to be able for them, it's going to help them be able to navigate control woes. Teams that maybe have like some really good S&D strats coming in, and they'll be able to grind out 3-0, 3-1s against these teams. Now, some other interesting stats to talk about with this team. First off, in regards to search, one of the reasons why New York has been so good in S&D this year is been converting their offenses when they have the plants down, but they have been at times a little bit iffy, a little map dependent on getting first bloods and then blowing the 4v3s if they're not able to get the plant. So that's a little bit of sort of an interesting issue that you got to deal with, right? And Rio Search, unfortunately, has been a map they've been unable to really figure out. So that has been not been getting played on their end for a minute here. We'll see if they try to introduce that into the pool. But their invasion has been pretty good throughout the year. Their Karachi has been pretty solid. The high rise, they start off really good. Have kind of like petered off a little bit on that. And the 6 stars, obviously a journey for a lot of teams. But you see that their attacking stats on 6-star are really good. It's just, as always, can you win your defenses, which haven't always been the case. They're kind of all over the place on those defensive stats. They haven't won a lot of defenses, but they win opening duels. They win those rounds. They get them 4v3. So interesting stat there on the defensive side. To me, I think their search, the biggest X factor is Kiz. If Kiz is able to make the plays that he wants to make in search, they are very good. If Kiz gets neutralized, then they are very kind of one track in S&D. They get a little bit of exposed because Sib and Skies aren't the fastest players in that game mode. And honestly, once people know and can find Hydra on the map, they do kind of isolate him. He's a very aggressive player, and they at least trade his life. He's not really alive at the end of a lot of rounds. So that is a kind of vulnerability for New York, and that's why they lost that high rise against FaZe in the finals. That is part of the reason why I think FaZe have at times had the matchup against them in S&D, as well as why sometimes when it works, they're able to effectively embarrass LAG on a 6-star S&D and lose finals of the last event, for example. So I kind of like New York's search game, but this one should be interesting to see if they continue the kind of S&D form they're in, or people, continually to kind of plug away at sort of the weaknesses in their map pool right now in search, which is high rise and Rio. Because if you're not going to play Rio, if you're New York, that's an auto veto. Well, high rise is getting picked, 6-star is getting picked, and you're going to have to win those maps. And lastly, they've been solid, but not amazing in control. It's been a solid top 4 wide, but they aren't the world's best control team. And honestly, for top squads, they pretty much try not to really, I would say, if you look at these stats, you'd be like, well, I don't want to play these guys on high rise. The problem is Karachi's so 50-50 that I think high rises end up in these series. And you see that against some of the better control teams like FaZe. They have been a little bit unsuccessful in converting that, but that 3-2 win against Optic Online was kind of nice. Beating Toronto on a Karachi control was nice. I expect New York to be serviceable at control, but they're not like a dominant team in this game mode. And with Seattle's big improvements in control, this could be an area of opportunity for Seattle in this series. They could take a high rise against New York. So I think, before we hop over to Seattle, New York's got a great map pool. There are some ways that Seattle might be able to attack that. We're going to get to that in a second. But I think New York is destined to win that match. And I really think that New York will get deep into the weekend. Now, can they beat FaZe again in winners semifinals and not get dropped down? We shall see on that, because the only victory they've had against FaZe on land was that grand final. We know FaZe's issue is any other day but Sunday, they're usually pretty automatic. So it's going to be a case of New York in another losers bracket battle. Can they do it, and can they make the finals, or is it going to be like the other events this year where they lose for Toronto or Optic and get 3rd, 4th, and don't get to the finals? We shall see. But I expect New York to be a factor all tournament long. Now, Seattle's a bit of an interesting team as we hop over and discuss them. It's a big, basically, start over for Seattle surge this season after the accuracy, Pred, Mac, Sib team kind of broke up. They clean house. Rambo comes in and coaches the team. They start off with a full new roster of Arceus, Hook, Illy, and Abuza. And I'll be honest, when this roster was for a first build, we were very critical. We're like, why is Abuza going to be on a second sub? Either Alec or Illy's going to get dropped. And they were serviceable online going into Major 1. Were really very dominant on Terminal. But their lack of quality control and great play on the other maps kind of killed their ceiling. And they got 6th at Major 1. They made a good run into Saturday, but they were just never really looking like they were going to be some big upset candidate to get top 4 at that event. And they really bottomed out online after that event. Once, the map pool started getting adjusted, they decide after that event to move on from Inder. And we still don't know why Inder got dropped, but He hasn't come back since. And so Brezzy comes in. They really struggle with the Kyler, Brezzy, Abuza, Alec combo. Look really poor in all game modes. Look like they're just kind of running around causing chaos, and they get dead last in the major 2 cycles. So they decide to make major changes at that point. Arcides is dropped. They're both Ender and Arcides, who I thought one would be gone by the end of the year. They both end up being gone. They end up running a lineup of Abuza, Hook, Brezzy, and 04. I think 04 joined the team, and Abuza then moving into more of a main AR roles. Kind of like helps I think simplify the roles, and Abuza should have been on AR to begin with. Online in Major 3, they were okay, and they get a top 6, which that's a kind of an improvement at Toronto. But where they really, I think, excelled for me and probably played their best COD was this last split. And again, another top 6. But if we dive into the tournament here, and you see kind of their journey to that, they beat Vegas and then lost to FaZe, predictable, and then lost the game 5 to Toronto. And it's really been kind of Seattle's issue here. If we hop over, some of the teams that they have beaten this year, like consistently, you're going to see that against top 4 teams, they're just not able to convert this. They've got 1 win against Toronto on the entire season. On that, they're 1-5, 0-3 against Optic on the season, 0-3 against FaZe, and 1-3 against New York. Like they were for a while the top 6 team that we were like is fit 6, but they're never going to be top 4. And I think it's the lack in the way that they play, which can be a little bit undisciplined. It can be a little bit loose. Like they just get punished by those teams because there's a little bit more structure. And you see the overall stats for the Seattle team. They have been at times a good S&D team, but you see the respawn is incredibly up and down. And some of these stats, 1-7 on sub base on the season, 1-6 on Skid Row was in, 1-4 on Invasion. Obviously, those last 2 maps are out. You see the remaining maps in the pool. Like it's pretty much a case of like map by map, but the 7-1 in Vista gives people a lot of pause, and I think teams are going to have to respect that, as well as the 9-5 on Invasion S&D. I also want to note that they were a terrible high-rise control team, but they are now 3-2 in their last 5 on that map, and they're also 5-3 on their last Invasion. So the control has been improved, and I think if you are Seattle, I highlight this against New York. I think New York is a solid control team, but they aren't the world's best #1 team in the world on that game mode. I think that would go to FaZe. And so I think Seattle's improved control play, if they can actually like convert that against a top team, I think they've got a good chance in the series. Like I'll be very curious if Vista Hardpoint ends up in the series, because I know New York's very good at it. If we flick over to New York stats here and scroll to the left, you see that they're 7-5 on Vista, but you would think they're going to respect 7-1 for Seattle. And then Seattle will probably try and get rid, you would think, of probably Rio against New York, because they looked really good on it, especially at the last event. So I'm thinking maybe it's a sub base 6-star kind of Karachi combo here, which I still think probably favors New York. Again, Seattle's 1-7 on sub base. Maybe they have to let Rio in, and so we do end up getting a Rio 6-star Karachi combo. I think it's going to be tough for me to see Seattle taking 2 of those hard points, but could they steal 1? Yeah. Now, the reason I'm a little concerned about Seattle in this series, and why I think the NYSL is going to be really hard for them, is I just don't think their S&D has been as good as you might think in the last 60 to 75 days. Obviously 04 has come in and been really good at the game mode. You see in his KD ranks, he ranks 13th in the league in overall KD in the last 60 days. But you see the other problem is that players like Brezzy and Kyler have really struggled in the game mode. And Kyler in particular, who's your most aggressive player, only converting 46% of his opening duels is not exactly what you want. And you see against top teams, Toronto and FaZe, they went 0-3 at the last LAN on trying to beat those guys in searches. And only against FaZe did it go to a round 11. And that was actually, if I believe correctly, the map in which FaZe is down like 2-5 and made a comeback in that one. So I think Seattle's going to need to put a lot of work in their S&D play against a clinical New York team. And you see these stats, they definitely scare you with how poor Seattle is on offense. So for me, I think the chance for Seattle to actually like win one of these top 4 matchups is going to be like basically taking 2 respawns and ideally, probably, if you really want to, probably winning game 2. I think if it goes to a 5th game, I think New York's going to win, because if we take a look at New York stats in the last 60 days, they're 4-3 in map 5s. If I go here and we load by season, shout out Easy Mac for this sheet, and I go back here, you see that they're 9-6 on the season in map 5. And I really just don't see Seattle being a good Game 5 team, although they're 6-5 on the season. I just think New York are clinical in those Game 5s. They're clinical with their last year in Game 5s as well. They've kind of continued that record. I think Seattle has to probably like 3-1 here and take potentially 2 or 3 respawns in order to get there. I just don't feel confident in the Game 5. That's why I was saying in the last video, I'm like, people might think, oh, Seattle have a better chance against New York than LG does against Optic. I really just think that New York, I just don't see a lot of paths forward for Seattle in this one. And a lot of it is going to come down to really good prep work they've done the last few weeks to try and steal some respawns here against New York, because I just don't really see the S&D on the Seattle side being a strength that they can, or a weakness they can exploit against New York, to be honest, in my opinion. Now, but that being said, maybe Kismet and Paco come out and do some weird stuff, and New York's S&D looks disjointed. Maybe, but I just don't see that as very likely. So I think for New York, again, I talked about it earlier in the video. I really think that they're going to be a factor, make it to the weekend. Again, it comes down to how they play on Saturday and Sunday. I think for Seattle, unfortunately, I kind of see this team getting dead last at this event. Maybe depending on the bracket draw, if they get like a favorable matchup against one of those bottom 4 teams, they can win that one and get top 6. It's definitely doable. But I think for the Seattle team, it's an improvement. They were kind of trending towards, maybe having a shock non-champ spot based on like kind of solid online play in the first half of the year. And I think my concern for the Seattle team is that if they lose, when they lose this event, I think it's going to happen. Boo's going to be a free agent. Is he going to go somewhere else? 04 will get a lot of interest and potentially buyout interest from some teams depending on moves. And then what are you going to do about Hook and Brezzy? I think the Seattle team could go through some major changes in the offseason, but they have upset potential. I don't think it's New York. They haven't really shown it on LAN all year, so I'm going to say probably not. So let me know in the comments what you guys think of New York and Seattle coming to this event. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. In my next video, we will break down my bracket predictions for champs, so make sure you be on the lookout for that. And as always, guys, we'll see you on the next one.